Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to once again be joined by the legendary Christopher Young. On today's episode, we will talk about some of his career highlights and also cover Echo 3, which is now available on Apple TV. It is my great pleasure to welcome back Christopher Young.
I'm so thrilled, Michael. I can't thank you enough for having me on board again. This is a wonderful, wonderful a moment, and we've had a great time in the past doing interviews. Thank you for having me come back on board. I'm honored.
Great, thank you, and sure thing, it's always a pleasure to have you on my show. And Chris, I know that there are many, many composers out there, especially young and up-and-coming composers who want to work their way up through this industry, and sometimes they really have a hard time and they struggle. And what was it like for you to work your way up? And I know it's a slow process and it doesn't happen overnight, that's for sure. How would you describe the struggle and the trials and tribulations of your early days?
Well, to those who are listening that are trying to make this dream of theirs come true of being a film composer, you know, I have had over the course of my lifetime, since I moved out here into Los Angeles, I guess nearly 40 years ago or something like that. Well, actually over 40 years ago, the opportunity to meet so many incredibly talented composers who definitely have that special gift of being able to use their talents to enhance the visual media, whatever it is their format of the visual media they're working with. They've got that magical thing, that thing that makes all film composers a little offbeat. You know, we don't quite fit in anywhere, do we? I've often humorously said we're like members of this very elite club, but once you enter this club, it's like virtually impossible to get out of it. So to those who are starting off or on their journey, I can only say to them, keep the faith. I know it seems like madness, but I would like to think that if you stay the course and never give up, things will work out. Having said what I just said, I do know of composers, again, these very same group of younger composers who moved out here or visited or had dreams of coming here, and it never quite clicked, and I've never understood why. I'm baffled. I get asked the question, you know, what is the key to success? How did you make it work for you, and what do I need to do to make sure it happens for me? And I can make suggestions, but I've never quite understood why it worked for me, but sometimes it doesn't work for others. I just don't get it. I'm confused about that. Because it was not an easy, when I say not an easy thing, I had some stumbles along the way establishing my career here, including, I applied to UCLA and USC to try to continue my academic career and get a master's degree and finally start to study film scoring. And when I moved out here, I already knew I wanted to be a film composer, but I'd never written anything for movies or any kind of visual media before. And I was really just a novice in the writing world. I was originally a drummer and had made the move to writing. So I came out here with just this love for film music, this mad love for film music, without having the background that would have merited the move. Fortunately, I was young enough so no one could talk me out of it. When you're a kid, you get these things in your head, and you're not thinking logically. You're just being guided by the light of your emotions. And my emotions told me that this love for film music is so deep that you should follow through in it. My parents were like, "Oh, what's the matter with our kid? He's losing it." But anyway, I moved out here after getting turned down at UCLA and USC. The first time I applied, I got accepted the second time. I applied to UCLA, and I had to get my act together. So that was a hiccup along the way. I remember when I moved out of the head of the composition program at UCLA at the time, thought I had absolutely no talent. And I was crushed. I used to cry every day when I first moved out here because I was convinced that this was foolish of me to think that somehow this dream was going to fall into place. I can only say that the reason why it may have clicked for me ultimately was I was so freaking driven. Was I driven because I had this vision that I put out there, like they say that all you need to do for success in this book called The Secret, this philosophy you put out into the universe, the thing that you want to have happen. And if you stay focused on that, it shall happen. I didn't know. I don't think that's what it was. I was prompted by the fear of failing and having to return back to New Jersey, my home state, with my tail wagging between my legs, telling my parents I'd failed at doing this. No, that just wasn't possible. I couldn't do that. And so maybe that's the eagerness, the hunger, the desire, the obsessiveness, the single-mindedness about wanting this to happen was the thing that made it happen for me over the other students in my class who were also very talented, more talented than I was when I first walked into the classroom. I just kept studying, learning, and trying to improve my writing. And the wonderful thing about being a film composer is that unlike being a rock and roll star, there's room for growth. In the world of rock and roll, generally, the songwriters will do their best work from the ages of 17 to 35 or something like that, and then it's a slow disintegration of their writing skills. I don't want that's kind of a sweeping statement, but we know that there's this window for most rock and roll people. They write for the youth when they are youthful. And then when they get old, it's hard for them to stay abreast of what's current. Whereas in film music, we don't have to worry about that. Not quite as much. We have to be cognizant of what's going on in the music world around us. But we're still given the opportunity to grow, and most film composers don't really make their mark, I think, into their late 30s, 40s, even 50s. And we see John Williams, who's in his 90s, and he's still at it. It's an evolution. And in the world of instrumental music, for film and for the concert stage, there is a history of composers continuously growing and evolving and getting better as they get older, not worse.
Thank you very much for elaborating on that, Chris. I know that being a film composer and working in this industry often means that you have to work under a tremendous amount of pressure. And do you remember a specific project that's put on the pressure really hard and you were in kind of a panic mode, so to speak, in order to really make it across the finish line?
I would say yes. Pretty much that is the case with every project. There's never this, when I take on something, I guess for the first 24 hours, I'm excited about having been given the opportunity to work on the picture. But once I'm on board, I know that I feel this fear of needing to outdo what I did previously. That's always been my aspiration. I never write down to a movie. I never think that it's beneath me. I'm always feeling that whatever I wrote before was not good enough, so I better do it right this time. And so there's that anxiety that I put on myself to begin with. There's also the initial concern of, by the way, are the notes going to come this time? Where do they come from? Well, there's the inspiration. What is that really? And when people are their most inspired, is stuff being channeled through them, given by some external power like God or whatever. That might be the case. I've heard that the notes actually are generated from a part of our brain which sits like right above the right side of our heads, above our ear. And so at the end of the day, I think the notes come from somewhere inside of our, in some portion of our brain. And would they come? Do they come? Will they not come this time around? I can't say. And I think therein lies the anxiety, is that they're not going to come this time. Why should they come? Fortunately, I've never suffered from writer's block. I've never had that problem. I would say of all the times I was most panicked, it would, of course, have been at the beginning of my career, because writing fast is something that doesn't come immediately to a composer. That's the first thing that a film composer has to adjust to, is the quantity of music within the period of time. No one's ready for it, but there it is. And so I remember on the very first movie, I had to move from a guy who probably could write 30 seconds of music a day to a guy who had to figure out how to write 2 minutes a day. And that was not easy. That caused sheer panic, sheer panic. And of course, so I cannot tell a lie. At the first movie, I needed to get a friend of mine to come in to help finish up some cues. I mean, I always feel bad about that, but because I know that's the way it is, but I always try to avoid getting people into ghostwrite for me. I'm not into that at all. And this was a situation where I had to, just because I didn't know how to write fast enough. The other thing back in those days that caused a different level of panic was that we didn't do mock-ups. There was no home studio. So the only person who really knew what it was going to sound like was the composer and the orchestrator. We were the only two people who really could hopefully know what they were going to hear when we walked on the stage. It was all in our heads. There was no audio representation of it other than playing the score at the piano. But that didn't, of course, pianos can't suggest colors. Don't define the instruments that are going to be playing it. So that was always the tough thing, is walking on the stage and thinking to myself, is this going to sound like what I think it's supposed to sound like? And that caused me to change. Used to be a chain smoker. Seriously, I would have already had a cigarette going during this interview. I quit about 9 years ago. Anyway, walking on the stage was nerve-wracking because you didn't have mock-ups to ease the pain. Now usually we mock up everything. And so you get to hear what it's gonna sound like. The director gets to hear what it's gonna sound like. The producer, everybody gets to hear kind of what it's gonna sound like. So when you walk on the stage, that's not that incredible surprise element anymore. And in some instances, though not many, if the director is under stress himself to be somewhere other than on the scoring stage, since he's heard the mock-ups they often will say, I don't need to be there because I know what it's going to sound like. That wouldn't have been the case when I first started. I always managed to figure out a way, Michael, where the director, when we got on the stage, I would turn to them and I would say, is this anything like you thought it was going to sound like? And they would go, and to me, it was a great compliment when they would say, yeah, you know, this is pretty much exactly what I thought it was going to sound like. And all they had was me playing the piano and me pretending to be an instrument. Oh, yeah, and the trombones are doing ba 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 ba, and the violins are playing this. And I would show them that it was alive in my head. And they sort of get an audio picture of what I was trying to do. And when we went on the stage, they felt okay about that. So to get back to a quick answer, I'm always stressed out. I'm lucky in that I don't have writer's block. Being able to rely on, intuition only comes through experience. Things pop into my head a lot quicker when I see a scene than they used to, only because I've had the experience, and there's like a fairly deep well of writing that I've done by now that allows me to, even when I'm in a state of panic, something will surface that an idea will come to me that is based on something that I'd already done, even though I'm trying to reinvent the wheel on the movie score for that picture. Chances are it's going to be connected to something I've done before. The more movies I work in a particular genre, the more movies I score in a particular genre, means the deeper the well is, means probably the easier it's going to be for me to come up with a solution for the individual scene.
Great, thank you, Chris. And you've worked with so many directors, so many producers, and I was recently, or over the last couple of weeks, I was trying to rewatch as many movies as possible, but there are so many, so I couldn't manage to finish them all again.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of the preparation process for any interview, and I was rewatching, of course, Hellraiser, which was directed by Clive Barker, the very first one. I was watching Murderers 1600. I was watching Species. I was watching Jennifer 8, Urban Legend, Runaway Jury, The Wonder Boys. So we are talking about so many directors. Lasse Hallström, The Shipping News, Urban Legend, Jamie Blanks, Runaway Jury, Gary Fleeter, Norman Jewison, The Hurricane. So there's a huge amount of output and a big legacy. And if you were to re-examine the relationships you had with so many filmmakers, who do you think elevated your game as a composer in terms of project, in terms of material, and in terms of the way they direct you, and in terms of how you interacted with them?
Every single director I've worked with has, even when they're extraordinarily nervous about talking about music. And remember, directors the ones that have gone to film school take classes on every element of filmmaking except the music part of it all. It's a language that they don't understand. So they're nervous. They don't quite know how, they don't talk in terms of, oh, this should be in C minor. They don't talk music with you. They talk about, and I don't ask them to, I ask them to talk, like every film composer does, about the drama. Maybe there's some point they want the music to highlight that may not be so apparent. There's the temp music issue, of course, which is become just the way of life now. Every scene has been temp with music, and often a conversation includes what this temp is doing and whether they like it or not. So with each director, I do feel that something is happening with during the course, the very short time I'm with them, that is causing me to evolve somehow. There's been ones that have been not so easy. Yeah, there were stumbling blocks along the way, a lot of rewriting, misunderstandings. But you have to remember the director's under a lot of pressure, and the music is the last element that's brought to the film. There's very little they can do to change the movie other than hopefully, if there's an anxiety about the picture, the music's gonna fix it, at the last minute. But God, it's really hard for me to single out a director that the level of communication was so remarkable that it elevated me to new heights as a writer or as a thinker about film music in general. Of course, my experience with Clive Barker on Hellraiser did change the course of my writing, the movie itself, and his direction. And that sort of, really put me on the map and has continued to follow me like an imp or something like that. I got familiar. There's the shadow that it is put on everything that I've done. That's inescapable. I love the way he directed me. He said just the right things to make me see the picture in a way I might not have, that it was a sick romance. So hats off to Clive for elevating my writing and my thinking about what I could do as a film composer. It was actually on that movie, there was a cue I wrote in that movie that after I got finally to see it against picture, because we did not record that score to picture because there was no money for that. It made me finally ask myself the question or notice that maybe I was meant to be a film composer, because I was questioning it up till then. Gosh, of course, I did a lot of films with Jon Amiel, and I was so lucky. He had so much faith in me. I was brought on board my first movie with him, which was called Copycat, and that was a thriller, murder mystery, serial killer mystery, and I wasn't his first choice. The first choice wasn't able to do it, got another job, and so I came on board, and that opened up the door for a series of movies. Each one was different than the last. He's the first one who really showed faith in me being able to write a comedy score, which was his follow-up to Copycat. It was The Man That Knew Too Little. And, God, here's the guy that writes all the scary music and he wants me to do his comedy. Fantastic. He was thrilled with it, and that was great. So every film I did with him was different. I do remember in Copycat that in each case, I'm trying to mind meld with the director. I'm trying to see the film from their eyes, through their eyes, using my notes, but seeing it through their eyes. Let's face it, every movie, there are an infinite number of musical solutions that could work for that picture. The obvious ones wouldn't work. You don't write comedy music for a horror film or horror music for a comedy film unless you're trying to get fired really quickly. But outside of the obvious mismatches, there's so many options for what one can do. But I remember on Copycat, John, he was a trained musician. He studied sitar, of all the weird things. He's English, and he studied sitar in India. Not a composer, or he was a part-time composer, but he gave that up. But he would talk about things to me, and I could hear the music as he was talking about it. He would talk about, I need something up above, higher, and it needs to do this sort of thing. He'd be telling me, and I go, oh my God, I know exactly what he needs. I know exactly what he needs. So that was like a mind melding thing of the highest type. Another one that comes to my mind, Charlize Theron, Sleepwalking. Here's an actress who starred in this movie, produced the movie. She had a falling out with the director. She took over post-production. She hired me to score this movie after deciding that the composer, the director, wanted to use it. Wasn't going to work for her. And she came in, and we used to see each other. She'd come in and give me her thoughts. And I must say, I was stunned at how, for an actor, she was so exacting, but at the same time giving me the space. Talking about mind melding with someone, I'd like to think I mind melded with her for that period of time we were together. I was so impressed by the way she directed me. And she'd never directed anyone before, I don't think. And I remember telling her, you should think about directing pictures. And she laughed that one off and said, no, I will never do that. But I do remember that being a movie in which the way in which I was guided brought the solution to the picture in a way that fitted her needs exactly. And so that was a great experience. She was an actor, but, I wouldn't have known that when we were working together. Of course, Sam Raimi, I love the way he directs me. Sam is like, knows exactly the right things to say to me. If he's not liking what I'm doing, or thinks it's, when I say not liking it, he thinks it's not exactly what's right for the scene. He won't, tell me things like, you've got to be kidding me. This is not right. You're all wrong here. No, rather he'll say, I really like what you're trying to do here. Bravo, maestro. Sometimes he'll say to me, bravo, maestro. Great cue. Really great attempt. But listen, can you maybe rethink this, because I think this should happen here instead. And I go, of course, Sam, of course. When I was young, I think I made some mistakes with directors in my eagerness to seek perfection and, get defensive about the way I saw the picture musically. I just don't think, I think everyone knew that if I ever, got a little defensive, it wasn't because I was just I had a bombastic ego or something like that. They always knew that it was done in the name of trying to make this film the best it possibly could be. But as I've now that this latter part, I get so excited when I'm brought on, and so thankful, that there are directors that still want to have me be a part of their team, that I'm like, the instant I want to be the perfect team player. I want to make sure you're happy. I want to make sure everyone's happy. What can I do to make this the best experience for you guys? That's kind of my new attitude. I love the idea of coming up with something that everyone's happy with. That's a real rush. Whereas that wasn't so much the case in the old days. Now it's a big thing. To try to do it my way, but at the same time, I'd be willing to adjust and successfully adjust my way to make it more their way.
That's a great explanation, and thank you, Chris. Allow me to ask you one last question before we talk about Echo 3. And I know we talked about it in the past, but has there been any development in getting Spider-Man 3 released, or is that a long shot?
I think that's a dead deal. I mean, I don't think that's ever going to happen. There were two, I think I explained it, there were two reasons why I was told it wasn't going to happen. The first was, I heard that the Pop album did so poorly, they didn't even want to discuss a score album because of that. Then they swung around again later on and said, well, we we're okay with releasing a score album now, but it's under this condition that you remove all of Danny's themes, any themes that you used that I had to use from the score. I said, okay, we'll see how that goes. And then I tried to do it, and it just wasn't going to work. It was, you know, how can you remove the Spider-Man theme, from the score? There was only two themes that I had to keep in mind, and I had to utilize repeatedly. One was the Spider-Man theme, the other one was the Green Goblin theme. And to remove those from these cues, it just wouldn't have worked.
That's a travesty because I think it's one hell of a score, and let's see what happens. Maybe at some point, maybe 10 years from now, somebody will, make a decision and say, well, of course now we've got everything cleared, and let's just release it. And I know many fans are eager to have it in their collection, but unfortunately, it's not gonna be happening for the time being. And sorry to be asking about this again. I
Oh
thought
no, it's not
I,
again. I'm thrilled that you. I mean, it touches me. Actually, I was in Prague. I don't know, nearly a year ago, half three quarters of a year ago, for a festival they had there, and they asked me to prepare something to be performed 10 minutes or thereabouts. So I put together a 10-minute suite of stuff for that concert. I have a longer suite, a suite that's probably closer to 17 minutes continuous, but they wanted me to cut it down, to shrink it down. But anyway, I had that performed. It was performed live, and it really rocked the room. I mean, it really, the audience seemed to really enjoy it.
Now let's talk about Echo 3, a fantastic series. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first time in your long career that you've worked on a TV series which encompasses 10 episodes. What was it like for you to switch gears from film to television to episodic television?
You're absolutely right. This is the first time I've ever done anything episodic. I've written music for episodes within a series, like 50 States of Fright, like Autopsy for the Cabinets of Curiosity. Like because of these interviews, I reminded myself that long time ago I did a couple of the Twilight Zones, the new Twilight Zone show. So I've done episodes, but never a long series. So here's the scoop. This was a unique setup in that Mark Bowles, who was the producer, writer of this show, who had won an Academy Award for The Hurt Locker, for producing and writing The Hurt Locker, brought me on board after the first composer's score wasn't working for him. And I was brought to his attention by Paul Ottoman, who was responsible for the sound design and mixed the show, to dub the show. I've known him for years. He is Sam Raimi's guy, and that's how we met. And he's been a big fan of mine. So he recommended me. What was different about this show is that Mark encouraged me to write pieces of music. I call them like studies or whatever, self-contained pieces of music that were really about the show itself rather than written to the show. That gave me the opportunity not to worry about molding my ideas to the screen, but rather just using them as a Kickstarter, as a Kickstarter inspiration for whatever ideas came into my head. So lo and behold, boom, the gun is fired. And I started, it's like, boom, every morning, boom, a new idea, one or two new ideas would come out. And over a short period of time, I just wrote, I think, 3 hours of stuff uh, that were all individual tracks, you know. Not some of them was written to the picture for sure. Some of it was molded specifically for scenes. If he felt I needed to do that, I would do that for those particular scenes. But the majority of that score was not written while I was watching the scene. It was inspired by it, or inspired by the show in general, and then in conjunction with the music editor, we tried putting things up against the show and then reworked it to fit the show. So it gave me permission to just like run around in the park, you know, or you know, and see what came out of me. And he was very thrilled with what I did and was coming up with. And he would come over, listen, and make comments. But for the most part, it was thumbs up, just keep giving me more material. This batch, I need a little bit more of this, a little less of that. Um, the next batch, I mean, little more of this, little less of that. And that's kind of how it worked. I've done that before on features. So it was not anything really different. It's not like I scored an episode and then waited for the next one to be delivered uh, to come up with new material. I was always coming up with new materials about then taking that material and putting it to each episode as they came. So the material already existed by the time the episode was ready to be scored, if that makes sense. I was ahead of the game. That's what it was like. It was a fantastic experience. I would die to do another episodic thing in an instant, no matter what the conditions were. You know, I just for my first go round, it was like the perfect setting for being able to be really kind of imaginative and not stuck to the image.
Chris, if you were to explain the musical approach to someone who hasn't seen a frame of the show yet, what would you tell them?
I would say that a lot of the music is because it had to drive the picture forward. A lot of it hangs on rhythmic patterns, ostinatos. It's an acoustic based score in which a lot of it was played live and then some of it was live, then sampled and mutated. All done in my studio. I have a gigantic collection of percussion instruments and some weird string instruments, some weird wind instruments, weird keyboard instruments, toy instruments like you wouldn't believe. And knowing, or after researching Colombian music, I sort of used that to help guide me loosely. I would not say there's anything in the score that is a direct descendant of Colombian music, and yet it sort of was sitting in the back of my head. The nylon string guitar, you know, which we associated with Spanish music, for sure, is there a lot. A lot of these instruments that I would record these parts with were out of tune. You know, something not quite right about them. You know, they were broken, or so it created for this unusual, I guess, unusual mishmash of acoustic sounding instruments. Nothing is sampled. I mean, nothing is factory. There's no factory sound in this. Also, voices. I sing. I manage to get my voice in so many of my scores. There's me sort of humming or moaning, and we got the director's wife, who was the lead actress in the picture. She came in and she sang, sort of like as if she was in a therapy session, just sort of, yelping or whatever. And so that's there. The human voice comes into play. I remember going out and buying it at the Renaissance Fair that happened to have been in town, a bass ocarina. And so there's a bass ocarina in the score that I play, but it's a little whacked out. It's not quite normal. So this, in other words, it's an acoustic sounding score, but everything's a little bent, out of shape. A lot of rhythmic stuff, some tunes, but a lot of percussive patterns.
Will there be a score release, or at least a suite or some snippets of it?
This is the question of the moment right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is Apple going to allow this to get released? And I haven't gotten an answer on that yet. I sure hope they release it in some format. I can't imagine why they wouldn't. And I really want this one to come out. I so badly do. Why? Because again, it shows a different side of my writing.
Chris, what can we look forward to actually? There are 4 episodes to go. Are there any standout moments which you can talk about, either in terms of story or in terms of music that you wrote to picture? Anything that you can disclose?
Well, things start getting heated up, as you know. And so there's a lot of fast forward moving music. That's always exciting because, when the energy amps up, you're able to do things that you can't do when things are at a slower tempo. So there's a lot of action cues coming up, and I'm excited about those. Of course, the one moment where the composer gets to have their bit of glory is in the end, of the show. And so the grand finale music, I think, works well.
I was really happy when I was given this opportunity to talk about this show, because I felt when I read about the show that it could be a special one. With all the, let's say, abundance of shows that we get today, and all the, let's say, the CGI that is being shoved down our throats, and I feel that oftentimes stories being neglected, and it's just an overkill of images at times.
No, I get you. I know exactly what you're saying.
I'm always happy whenever I get the chance to watch a show, or let's say a movie which deals with this kind of subject matter. So, and you had to work with multiple directors actually during the course of this show. So can you walk me through that process, what it's like to work with many people, many directors on one project, one story, as opposed to just one?
Well, actually, I haven't done a lot of television.
Yeah.
But no, I never met a single one of the directors. So it was only Mark and the picture editor. Those are the only 2 people that came in to discuss with me what was needed. Never met the directors, have no idea if they like what I delivered. If I'd had to meet direct, that would have been kind of kooky. I don't think that, I can see why it's unfortunate for the directors, but, to make everyone happy, and you're changing. It's one thing to get to know one person and try to figure out what their aesthetic is, but then to have to go through 10 different people and they're always changing, that might have been an issue. The TV thing I can't talk about with any kind of, in-depth knowledge. No, I'm an outsider who got an opportunity once and for all to be an insider. And I'm thrilled it happened, absolutely thrilled. I love Mark for giving me the chance to do this. The guy who, as I said, usually is hired to scare the audience. That's not what was needed here. He was willing to take a gamble on me, and it worked out. So
Some people, for whatever reason, they seem to think that, well, Chris Young, he mostly scores, horror movies or thrillers. Well, you've done many, yes, okay, but you have proved many times that you are more than capable of working on drama. Murder in the First, for instance, one of my favorite movies of the '90s. I think that's one of your very best and most emotional scores. So
yeah, but you know how it goes, my friend, is if the film doesn't do well, I call it the Titanic principle. If the film goes down, everybody goes down with it. I'm with you. I loved working on that movie.
Chris, to wrap things up, is there any of your scores which you would like to see re-released or released in the first place? I know a large chunk of your music has been released, but there are some unreleased ones. And do any come to mind?
Well, as you get older, I'm noticing that I've had, believe it or not, I mean, I've got them all in my studio. I have them all numbered. I have every CD that's come out. Of course, both the official releases and then the promotional ones. They're over 100, CDs of my things that have come out. But 98% of them are out of print. And so you ask me which ones would I like to have in print? Well, I think every composer would like to know, that their stuff is not going to vanish, forever. When they leave this planet, move to wherever they're going to be moving to in the next life. It's always nice to know the stuff is still around. The movies will be around, but I don't, So, in answer to your question, is there any one specific one I'd like to see released? No, I'd love to see everything that wasn't released, that has been released, to be re-released, except for some of them. Some of the early ones I wish they just would go away. But here's the thing that I should bring to your attention as well, and I'll get to you when it's done. For about 6 years, if not more than that, well, probably more than that. As you know, some of my CDs, well, the way I put them together is not your normal Q space, Q space, Q space, Q space format, which is the standard way to present film scores. Nowadays, I guess it's every single piece of music that's written for the show in order, in picture order. I think it's often the case. I don't know. I don't buy many score CDs anymore. But, the history of film music as it's been released on vinyl and CD has been the composer gets involved and reworks the music so that it becomes a series of individual tracks, whether they're exactly the way they were in the movie or they're the way they were intended to be or some revised version of them. But it's a series of tracks that range anywhere from a minute to 6 minutes or 7 minutes. And back in the old days, you had to make sure that the last track on side one of the vinyl, went back to vinyl days, made the listener want to flip the record to pick up the party on the second side. And so there was an art to organizing the tracks. I think there was, and I was very hyper about trying to organize the tracks. And I still am. It's not like that's gone away. But a lot of the ones that I've done, instead of doing this Q space, Q space, Q space, I put them together into longer tracks, movements or suites or whatever. Not all of them, but a lot of them are in that format. Less cues combined together. With the technology being what it is today, you can do remarkable things with pre-existing recordings and transpose them, time stretch them, segue them in such ways that it almost seems like this is the way it was recorded, as opposed to the old days where you had to fade one and the other one fades up underneath it. It was really, you ran two tape machines with the faders. Now you can really modify the music. So here's what's going on. Is for the last 6 years, I've been going back to all of, I call it revisiting my old scores and trying to imagine what would the score have been if it hadn't been written for a movie? How would I like this material to exist had it just been music that was intended to be listened to, instrumental music on its own? And a lot of what's happened is that, first of all, I've gotten rid of a lot of it from the CDs, eliminated some material. On the other hand, written new material, extended ideas, and collected them in either a single movement or a multiple movement or, tone poem or whatever you might want to call it, that's about the movie. But hopefully an entertaining listen on its own. In some instances, like I said, I've so thoroughly revised the music that you might not even recognize it as being the score anymore. In some instances, like for instance, you mentioned Murder at 1600. You listen to that. I'd forgotten about that score, but I went back to it after not hearing it for 25 years. Because I never listen to my stuff after I'm done with it. In that instance, there was soprano sax that was used in a couple of the cues. And I said, maybe I'm going to make this like a 3-movement concerto of sorts for soprano sax and orchestra. So I wrote whole new soprano sax stuff, and then adjusted the music, did some extensions, added new parts to create this 3-movement concerto, in which the sax is the featured instrument throughout the whole thing. So I think, I can't remember, it's been, because I was ready almost to the finish line, and then I got all this work. There's 2 features coming out next year that I worked on, and I'm doing this Nosferatu project right now. And that's pretty intense. I've reworked these things into, like I said, suites or single movement tone poem-like things. But most of them are on the serious stuff, not the lighter stuff, not the combo stuff, but the orchestral material. And I think there's like 28 CDs or something. It's like a massive amount of, like 60 hours. Oh, no, it couldn't be. Maybe it's, I don't even know. I can't even remember how many hours of stuff, but it's lots of hours of stuff. It's like 60 some odd movies that I've reinvestigated and put together into these suites. Some of the movies have multiple suites. Most of them only have one, but I think it's 65 movies or something like that I've reworked. And I'm going to be making these box sets of CDs, big box, and I can't sell them because they're the original recordings. So I'm going to be giving them away, So I'll try to get you on the list. I don't know when this is going to be done.
I'll take one. Yeah.
It could take forever. I mean, no, it'll happen next year. It's coming out next year for sure, at long last. It would have been out 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, but I started getting all these gigs. The 2 movies, The Offering, which comes out next year, The Piper, which comes out next year. It was the Autopsy. There was the Lovecraft song selection that I wrote some additional material for. Again, the Echo 3, and now the Nosferatu thing, which put this all on hold. And by the way, I should get you this too, is I haven't prepared the CD for The Piper, but I had to write a flute concerto for that. And I'm very excited about that. That's the first time I've ever had to write a concerto for a movie. It's a 30-minute concerto, not of all of which is used in the movie, but there's chunks of it in which we see the orchestra on the stage playing.
Great. Great. That sounds really cool and promising. Great. So thank you for already, touching on your future projects. I'm really, really excited about those. Allow me to say that they should re-release the Urban Legends, and of course they should release Murder at 1600 in the first place, because I think that's a really, really good score, and I still love the movie. And believe it or not, there is actually no Blu-ray available of Murder at 1600. So
Seriously, really?
I'm not kidding. There is no Blu-ray available of this movie, so you have to actually still buy the DVD or get it on streaming services, Amazon, for instance. I've double and triple checked it. Not in the US, not in Canada, not in Germany. There is no licensed legal Blu-ray of Murder at 1600.
Well, again, after I've completed it, if there's no premiere, I don't watch the final dub. Sometimes, for these classes that I teach, I will extract scenes from different movies. So the scenes I will see, but the entire movie, no. And the scenes are usually the raw production ones, and I add the music to it so it's featured. It's not the released versions. I never use the released versions for my classes or when I'm lecturing or whatever.
Chris, is there anything else you would like to add?
Again, to the younger composers who may be listening to this, who are on the fence about whether or not they should pursue this or not. Their heart is telling them that they should, but the common sense that surrounds them by others who are not so inclined to want to encourage you to pursue that because it's such a vague career. My advice to you is please stay with it. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. Something's going to come out of it. You may not become the next John Williams and find yourself scoring one of the Star Wars movies in years to come. But there's a very, very good chance that somehow you will get connected to the film music world in such a way that you'll feel like you made the right decision to stay with music, and in particular film music. Stay on the path. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. Certainly don't let that negative energy keep you from going for it. Remember, it takes a long time. It's a gradual process. You don't have to worry about being a superstar when you're in your 20s or even your 30s. It may not happen until you're in your 40s. So stay on the path and don't let go of that dream.
Chris, I would like to thank you so very much for taking so much time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that. And I had a blast talking to you again, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I love it, Michael. Your questions, you really are a believer. I mean, you love film music, and because you do, you actually know a lot about what I've done and enough so that you could ask really intelligent and probing questions. So I love you for that.
Movies and music are my big passion, and I just love it, from the bottom of my heart. Thanks again for doing this again, and I'm looking forward to chatting again down the road. Stay safe and healthy, and take care.
Thank you, my friend.